If you want to get a good marketing plan, your marketing plan is to get minors addicted on your product. So social media, that's going on now. The Jewel, that's going on. All this stuff, we know. The video games, we know. We have smoking guns left and right showing that they are intentionally marketing the minors because they know they are the weakest and easiest target, and they are a 60, 70, 80 year long client if they can get them addicted.
Welcome to Hot Docket, the show where we talk about winning marketing strategies that have built the most successful law firms.
Join us every 2 weeks for the latest trends and tactics to grow your law firm.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Hot Docket podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about marketing for public interest news.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting when you can do marketing that you're not competing in the same sense with a lot of people. And when you go up a level and look at more informational marketing, I think that a lot of times there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yep. Higher in the funnel, less potential competition, all good stuff. So today we've got a very special guest. We have with us Gregg Goldfarb, the founder of Gregg Goldfarb LLP, a mass tort and personal injury firm based out of Miami, Florida. Thanks for joining us today, Gregg.
Thank you guys for having me.
So today's theme on public interest marketing, can you walk us through your background as an attorney and give us a little bit of history on both your firm, your podcast, and anything else that you think is relevant?
So I'm an attorney by trade. I've been doing it about 30 years, and I've sort of been on my own from the get-go, and I've handled basically a variety of cases, almost like the entire gamut of cases. And when I first got out of law school, I wanted to do good. There were two things I really wanted to do: environmental work, mental justice, and I wanted to go after a lot of the shysters that would be marketing infomercials. This is like even before cable. Well, I guess at the beginning of cable, late night. In law school, my roommate and I would be up at 3 a.m. and we'd watch, these get rich quick schemes. And I was like, I can't stand these guys, and I want to, that was sort of my mindset going in. And then there was a question of how are you going to make money? It was hard to make money doing environmental work. So I sort of transitioned into, that was like the Rodney King days. So everybody, I don't know if you guys might be too young for this. Rodney King got, a whole situation with the police and out in California. And so he won a board in court, and it's like, hey, listen, police brutality was a big thing. And I started to sort of just put things together, and I'm like, well, it looks like I'm kind of, angling public interest type stuff. As time went by, I got involved in mass torts, and mass torts, it just so happens, are environmental and public interest. A lot of, it could be anything from sexual abuse at the church, sexual abuse at Boy Scouts, sex trafficking, water contamination, all these big, large scale problems that are affecting a lot of people, either directly or indirectly, sort of where I have moved into. In my podcast, since I sort of transitioned into the mass tort world, maybe years ago, I needed a platform to sort of help me elevate my game, get me connected to some of the bigger players in the market. And so I thought, hey, if I bring them on my podcast as guests talking about their cases, I would get more joie to speak. I'd get my name out there and connection with this. I had to sort of rebrand myself. So that's what I did. And that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, and you're talking a lot about what I want to cover next, which is starting a law firm from scratch. You don't have that name behind you yet, and you have to start somewhere, right? For you, it might have been bringing folks on the podcast for that rebrand just to kind of catalyze something. So can you just talk us through starting the firm and whether you recommend it for other attorneys?
It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. You've got to be able to withstand years that you don't make much money. Maybe you end up spending more money than you make. And can you afford to do that? There's a lot of money out there in the litigation funding. There are a lot of lenders that even Wall Street has moved into the mass tort space. Not that's the only way to start a practice, but the marketing has become, in the old days, you weren't even allowed to market. And then I guess we thought we were holier than thou and it was beneath us. And then somebody went to the Supreme Court in Arizona, and sure enough, that ended the whole ban on it. And now everybody sees billboards and benches and all that, and on social media and TV. Who hasn't seen a commercial about mesothelioma, Camp Lejeune, and all that? So the question becomes, do you have the financial wherewithal, the risk tolerance to do it? If you do, the rewards can be enormous. You can make a lot more money than being a big partner in a big firm, or being a partner in a mid-sized firm, or working for the government. But the downside can be severe, and you could be closing up shop. I've heard many horror stories of people, they settle a case, or they think they're settling a case, then they're spending money that they don't have, and then they're not doing their trust account, and then they get in trouble with the bar. And so you really need to know that it is an uphill battle, but it's a battle that can really produce, a tremendous bounty.
So switching gears for just a second, can you tell us about some of the guests you've had on your podcast and some of the best parts of having a podcast?
Yeah, so I've been doing it for 3 years. I try to do one show a week, which, is a challenge to get guests, good guests. I have people pitch themselves to me. A lot of lawyers will pitch themselves to me. They want a big case. They want to talk about it. I don't know that too many people want to hear about your 90 million. I mean, it sounds great and all that, but it's not really the topic that, I think you're going to get a lot of listeners on. And I've tried to go, I try to really be as expansive as I can when I talk public interest in my world. So I have brought on this last year, I know there was a big homeless case that was ruled upon by the Supreme Court from Oregon. So I thought it was a good idea for me to reach out to a gentleman by the name of Ron Book. Ron Book is like a legend in Florida, lobbyist, lawyer, and homeless advocate. So I like the advocate angle. And even though it wasn't really law, I mean, it was law. There are legal issues around homelessness, but the topic was more about how to, what things have worked in terms of dealing with the homeless. Then we have another gentleman in my community. I'm from Miami, Florida. So I figured, let me go after some of the people that are doing not really, litigation oriented public interest stuff, but just public interest. And so I brought on Ron McGill, who's like probably one of the bigger names in the wildlife space. He's been running the Miami Zoo forever, and he's been on like sports radio. I mean, everybody loves this guy. He's been on sports radio. He's been on this very popular Spanish show called Sábado Gigante. He was a regular guest there. So we talked about, Florida's got a lot of environmental issues, including, preserving species. We've got invasive species. We got pythons. We got so much stuff going on, and he's a great guest. You could talk to him about anything. Anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish, so the anti-Semitism issue, has a lot of emotional appeal. What's going on in Israel? So I brought on one of the anti-Semitism advocates, a local one for me from the Miami area, Brian Siegel. He was a guest, and we talked about his group, the American Jewish Committee, and what they do to combat anti-Semitism. So those are like 3 recent guests that were not like lawyer talk. And that's what I really like. And also my girlfriend is a substantial artist. I don't think substantial is the right word, but she's a very good artist, and she knows the art community. And Miami, I mean, I'm 58. So when I was young, the art world in Miami, there was really not much going on. But in my lifetime, it's gone berserk. Art Basel is probably one of the biggest fairs in the world. And my girlfriend is like connected with a lot of the art players in the community, including Dennis Scholl, who turns out he started out an accountant, then he was an attorney, philanthropist, just making it happen left and right. And he really helped elevate the art world in Miami to a degree that it is the place, I think, in the United States for art fairs. I know the people in Los Angeles, New York are going to tell me no, and maybe they're right. But I mean, at this point, it's a lot of fun. I mean, if you're ever down in Miami in December, early December, Art Basel, there's 28 other fairs, amazing art, parties up the wazoo. And so I brought him on to ask him, and interview him and have him showcase his life, how he brought art to Miami, and what he's doing now in his life.
I think it's really interesting you brought up the homeless advocate earlier, though, because Miami is so weird where I know where your office is because it's where our office used to be. We used to be
Yeah.
66 West Flagler. So I know that area. You go outside and there's just like an endemic homelessness problem kind of
Yeah.
everywhere right around there. And then you go a couple of streets over and you're in like a thriving arts district. So
Yeah.
it is like a really bifurcated city in that way. So, like, just riffing on that topic, I'd love to hear if there are any other public interest type of campaigns you can think of that were maybe controversial at the time and created a uniquely challenging scenario to market for.
Well, wow, that's pretty interesting. So the opiate crisis is, when I think of like challenges in the marketing space, I think of the opiate issue. So Oxycontin, the Sackler family, Purdue, they started to promote Oxycontin as a pain relief type of regimen. And they knew that it was highly addictive. And they basically would tell the doctors, no, it's not. And, that the science saying it is bullshit and all that. And nonetheless, the problem was so significant and substantial that it not only included the Sacklers and their company, Purdue Pharma, but it also included the distributors of OxyContin. So, like Walgreens, CVS, and you say to yourself, well, hey, why are they at fault? When you're in a small town, when Walgreens is in a town of 2,000 people and they're dishing out, 200,000 prescriptions for opiate, that's a red flag. And there are statutes that basically will impose obligations on the distributors. Hey, when these things, red flags happen, you're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And they weren't. They were just making a fortune on it. Everybody was making a fortune on it. We all knew there was a problem. Hundreds of thousands of people were dying a year, suicide. Local governments were spending enormous amount of money on healthcare, police, to deal with the criminal aspects of it and what have you. So now the case starts, and lots of people are, not only governments, individuals, Indian tribes, were all filing all over the place. So it was, what we I think the Washington Post called it the most complicated legal case in jurisprudence history. And so what the idea behind a lot of the, what we call multi-district litigation framework is, you want to get everybody that's been affected or injured into these cases. And so that they can, when the settlement comes, they can all get settled, and that will be the end of it. It'll be a global resolution. So the complexity of it, and the fact that you got a Walgreens in Spokane, and you've got an Indian reservation in Nebraska, and then you've got 30,000 victims, individual victims in New York. The challenge was for the judge and the court, and the players involved in the case, was to actually get the opiate victims to sign up. So how are you going to get them? Oh, they don't even know what's going on. They're on the street. They're not getting newspapers. They're not getting the news. They're not looking at social media. They have no idea. But they are the ones that really need to get the money to get help, right? And some of them have died, so their families should get compensated for this. So it was just an enormous effort to try to get word out. How do you do that? These days, let's just take, for example, the Camp Lejeune. So you had people that were living at Camp Lejeune. Most of them use social media. Most of them watch TV. So if they were at Camp Lejeune and they had a horrible illness, maybe one of their family members was there and they died, or they were pregnant, botched pregnancy, what have you, whatever. They know about the case and they could get in. But the opiate victims, it was a challenge. So there was one marketing firm that was basically appointed to go out and get everybody. And there's a lot of debate about how good of a job they did. But there's a lot of opiate victims out there that are not going to get compensated because they didn't file their claim. They don't even know about it. And so that comes to mind as like the biggest challenge in this space.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point earlier about why you started your podcast, and listening through this about how you have to connect with other attorneys and individuals to make sure that these things work well. With that being said, referrals are super important for the firms that are actually doing these cases. Are there any types of firms that might be listening to this podcast that you would want to contact you, whether it be about referrals in any direction?
Yeah, all right. So the perfect example is Florida. A few years ago, the Florida tort laws, the personal injury laws, the insurance claim laws were dramatically changed in a way which were pro business, pro insurance company, and essentially the consumer is going to get the raw end of the deal. This is my opinion. The advocates for these changes would say otherwise. They'd say the insurance premiums are going to go down, which will help the consumers. But let's just say you have a hurricane go through the state and damages a lot of properties. You've got insurance coverage for that, and they offer you very little money for those cases. In the old days, even if they offered you, let's just say you had a smallish roof problem, and they would offer you $200, but your bill, you know what the bill was, it was $1,000, and you're like, no, I wanted that. Well, in the old days, 2 years ago and before, you would be able to hire, you would have no problem hiring an attorney. Why? Because what we call first party insurance claims provides for attorney's fees as well as your damages. So, okay, as an attorney, I don't care that you only had $200 of damage. I'm not going to turn that case down because I'm going to get paid for my time by the insurance company. So go ahead. If the insurance company wants to fight over $200, as long as I win a dollar more than they offered, I'm going to get my attorney's fees. I could get $100,000 if they want to fight me for 2, 3 years. Now that's no longer available. So the person that's stuck with that $200 claim and the insurance company's, offering $150 and they don't want to take it or whatever, maybe they need that money or whatever to make themselves survive. It's going to be impossible for them to find an attorney. So I already know several attorneys in Florida who are looking to pivot. And that's I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen 15 years ago. My colleagues and I were talking that something like this would happen. So I had already thought about transitioning into the mass tort world. I was sort of dabbling in it because I had clients that would call me up. Hey, they have a fen case. Do I handle that? And I'm like, not really, but I would find the mass tort attorney that did. So I got to know some of these mass tort attorneys. And over 25, 30 years, I got a fen case. I got a hip replacement case. I got a Vioxx case. I got to sort of know the industry and some of the attorneys. And then we would meet and they would talk to me and they would encourage me. And I was looking to make the move. So attorneys in Florida have contacted me after they've listened to my show. Hey, they want to get into the mass tort world. And some people are like, all right, I'm working for a firm, but I want to move out. Same thing. They're the perfect people. Contact me and I can tell you soup to nuts how to get it done. All the trials and tribulations. It's pretty easy to get into this space, even if you don't work through the referral MO, right? So you're basically paying a marketer to get cases. You're not even answering the phone on the client calls or the potential client. You're not even answering the phone. The marketers have excellent call centers. So that's kind of packaged into the marketing budget. So it's an easy way for lawyers who are looking to transition. Maybe their law firm is slowing down and they want to add a new line of work. So whether it's Florida or even outside of the state of Florida, I've become sort of the go-to person for someone that's run a lot of campaigns with a lot of different law firms. And I've seen the good ones, the ones that'll answer my phone call and give me an update. And then I've seen the other ones that don't. And so I sort of already know who's good and some of them are excellent lawyers, but they're not good with communicating with referring attorneys. And so that can be very frustrating. Hey, what's going on with my cases? I spent a fortune and I don't even know what's going on with my cases. So and I also know the marketers. There's so many marketers in the space, even lawyers that were not succeeding in the law game moved into legal marketing. So I have used several marketers and I've had some good experiences and some bad experiences. And, it's like anything else. If you're doing something new, you could sit there and read the 8-page contract, but, do you really understand it? Until you go through it and like, oh, that's what they mean. Oh, you mean I could have substituted this case for another case? I didn't even realize that. Right. So, hopefully that answers your question.
I think just piggybacking off of that, I'd love to hear some of the strategies that you have employed for your campaigns and what's worked and what hasn't in the effort of public interest marketing.
You know, So there's some excellent conferences and legal conferences. There's one in Vegas that they hold twice a year called Mass Torts Made Perfect. The AAJ just had a conference, the National Trial Lawyers, and it's first of all, the conferences are exceptional. The speakers and the information, amazing. The networking opportunities are great. All the marketers are there. All the vendors are there. Let's just say you build up a big budget. Funders, right? So some people go in there, they don't have any money, and there's a lot of funders that'll give you a lot of money, right? Is that good? Is that bad? Does that put pressure on you? They're not giving you a 3% interest rate, right? Or 6% interest rate. So you can go and get a lot of these, all right, so you got to spend $2,500. You go to Vegas, you have a great time, you meet a bunch of people, get tons of information. I would highly recommend that. And the conferences are great. They bring on entertainers, amazing food, and it's Vegas.
I'm sorry, we got a barking dog for a minute.
It wouldn't
This
be an
happens
episode if it wasn't.
pretty much every
Maybe
episode.
I was saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, she was.
Come here, Tiki.
She doesn't like Vegas. She's sick of Vegas.
She's sick of Vegas. I can understand.
All right, let's replay that one back again for a second.
All right.
Do you want to ask the question one more time?
No, I think we could just pick up with the answer. So the question, just for reference, the question was, how do you market successfully? Like what are you doing for public interest marketing? And you'd started talking about conferences.
Yeah. So, for the marketing, you got to know the marketers and how they operate. And so a good way to really get a handle on that is to go, they've got some excellent conferences that lawyers will throw or groups will throw. And they bring on, the lawyers to speak about the cases, maybe even updating what's going on in the cases, or the new things like Ozempic is a sort of a newer case that's come out. I'm sure everybody's been seeing that in the news. And at these conferences, they'll have the vendors section. And who the vendors are: the marketers, case management software, right? Let's say you get a lot of cases and you got to stay on top of it. You need case management software. There'll be legal funders there as well, and they'll talk at these conferences as well. And so if you go, they'll probably, like, let's say the biggest one is the Mass Torts Made Perfect in Vegas, twice a year. And they will have a number of marketers go and give talks about how to market safely. One of the introductory programs that they'll have every year at these conferences is how to get involved. They'll actually talk to people like me. They'll have a conference. Here's how you can do it. You can do it on your own, marketing the cases, handling the cases, or you can market them and refer them. Some people like to want to get in. Maybe the better move is you market, you refer the cases, and you see how they're litigated. You see the pleadings, you see how they progress, so you can get a handle on. I mean, do you really want to be handling a multi-million-dollar case and mess it up because of a deadline that you didn't even know existed? Trap for the unwary. So that's, I think, one of the best ways to really get a handle on how to market and who to use.
Okay. We've been there to MTMP, AAJ, all the big events, and I totally agree with you on that. For us, it was great to meet a lot of the firms that are in leadership positions, and I totally agree with you. I think that those events have been super helpful for us as an agency as well. I want to switch gears for a second. I noticed on your site that you also handle whistleblower claims. Can you tell us a little bit about that, if there are some interesting claims you've been involved with in the past, or how you've marketed for those? I just think it's very, very interesting.
They're very, very difficult cases to handle, primarily because the whistleblower is, once they blow the whistle, their life may never be the same. Typically, they get fired. There's legal protections. You can't get fired in for retaliation for blowing the whistle. But, let's just say you're a pretty prominent engineer for Google and you blow the whistle. Where are you going to go afterwards if you get scorned or people see that you blew the whistle? That might be the end of your career. So there are times where people will blow the whistle and they are like, oh, I am blowing the whistle. I'm going to make a big bounty and I don't even care that I get fired. I'm gone. And then they find out they lose on a technicality. and then they're out. So you have to be really careful when you dip your toes into the whistleblower world. Everybody knows Job Corps. There's another agency called Rescorps, which was taking kids that were supposed, like, college age kids, and getting them work experience and all that. And they had a federal contract, and they're supposed to maintain 300 people more or less in the program at all times. Well, a lot of people would go in the program for a day or two and then drop out, and they were fudging their numbers. So I had two of the teachers in those programs, and they blew the whistle. And we were pretty successful, but we had issues in our case. A lot of the people that we really needed to testify just disappeared. We could not find them. They were in a different country. So I actually was starting the trial. A lot of whistleblower cases never make it to trial, but my opposition was really a jacks, not a good lawyer, big law firm. They build up the wazoo, and they forced me to try, but he couldn't try a case if his life depended on it. So I was able to bluff enough to settle the case at the beginning of trial, even though I had no witnesses. I had my client who could testify that they weren't in the program, but you really needed these students to say, no, I did leave the program one day, even though they had me in there for 300 days or whatever nonsense they were. I also, the private, talk about public interest. The prison, world is a bad place to be, obviously, but you don't want to make it worse for these prisoners than need be. You've got the Eighth Amendment. Some states want to privatize their prisons. So GEO was a big player in that space, and they would get a contract. They're supposed to run the prison. They weren't supposed to bill for upgrades that they would do themselves to the prisons that they would running. So my client he blew the whistle. He worked for the Police Benevolent Association, and he would go to their monthly meetings, and he would see that they were billing for, they added on a wing, they did this, and he's like, no, the contract says you cannot do that. And he would say this publicly at these public meetings with the public officials. And the public officials would say they don't care, they're paying the bill. So he blew the whistle there, $25 million, not a humongous recovery. Two of my good buddies who have been on my show do SEC whistleblowing, which is a newer genre. And so I've had them come on my show, David Chase and Scott Silver, and they're developing a pipeline. I'm not focused so much on getting those cases. They're hard to get. If they come in, I'm most likely going to refer it out because I just don't have the bandwidth to really properly handle that case and properly protect the individual, which is even more important from my perspective.
With that being said, are there any other cases you'd want to shine a light on?
Well, in the mass tort space, I talked about the opiate litigation. So, there's a lot of interesting cases going on. A lot of major decisions were made this year in the bankruptcy world. That's sort of become, in the old days, mass torts and bankruptcy were like, no way. But now what's going on is a lot of these Fortune 500 companies have figured out what we call the Texas two-step. So they'll create a new division, and they'll send all the liabilities to that division. So what are the liabilities? That's all the legal cases that they've been sued on. So they'll take the position, hey, that company, that's not us anymore. And they don't have any money, but they've got all these liabilities. They're just going to file for bankruptcy and offer pennies on the dollar, right? So that has been a hot issue this year. And the courts, for the most part, have rejected it pretty soundly. And so Johnson & Johnson, a whole host of Fortune 5, 3M, and now there's rumors. I'm not even going to go into the rumors, but there's rumors of other large companies with big mass tort dockets that are threatening to do the same thing. The other big bankruptcy issue this year in the mass tort public interest world has been what we call non-consensual release. So there's two big cases that happened recently that got ruled on. Actually, one in particular was the opiate litigation, and that's with the Sackler family. So the Sackler family and their company Purdue. Well, Purdue filed for bankruptcy, and they are bankrupt. They ponied up $5 billion to settle all their opiate mass tort litigation, and the Sacklers ponied up $6.5 billion. And even though everybody pretty much signed off on it, The Department of Justice, the trustee for the bankruptcy, said no go. Why? Because the Sacklers did not file for bankruptcy. So it sounds, hey, they're ponying up $6.5 billion. That sounds like a lot of money. But for a lot of people that really know that family, they know they're going to walk away. All right, so maybe they had 12 billion. Who knows how much money? Unless you go through the bankruptcy process and you have to show all your cards, and you have, the trustee basically digging into everything and trying to claw back all these moves that you made in the last 10 years because you knew this day was going to happen. You don't really know if they ponied up a lot of money, but how much money do they have, right? And then the Boy Scouts had the same issue. And so the Boy Scouts, you have the national group and then you have the local chapters. This was all about sexual abuse that was going on for 60, 70, 80 years. Has this sexual, a really sad story. I mean, listen, I feel bad for the Boy Scouts and anybody that was a Boy Scout, hats off to you, and hopefully you didn't get victimized. But, anytime you have a situation where you have adults supervising young kids, it happens in the prisons, it happens in the church. I'm sure everybody's been seeing that. The church, sexual abuse cases continue to be filed all over the place because, for years, the elders of these churches just let it happen. And I guess they tried, maybe they didn't try, and it just kept happening and happening. So those are two of the bigger, kind of interesting issues on the public interest side. Are we going to finally end sexual abuse of minors in an institutional setting? At an institution that's like revered. You're sending your kid to church, he's a choir boy, and, nobody wants to admit that they've been sexually abused. So maybe we move the needle. When I say we, the Mass Tort Bar has moved the needle in terms of making an improvement. Years ago, cars were just poorly designed, and the Mass Tort, personal injury attorneys really went after the car industries, and cars are a lot safer now because of us. So I have, if you count them, I have four fingers on this hand. I was involved in a rollover, SUV, and it was one of the first model SUVs, and you could tell just driving it around. You would turn and what is going on with that car? And sure enough, it rolled over, and somebody in my car died. I lost a finger, but I was actually in a Blazer a couple months ago that was driven by the dealer of the dealer of the car manufacturer for this car or whatever, and he's my buddy or whatever, and I'm like, oh my god, you're not putting me in a Blazer. But it was much safer. He's like, oh no, look, he's like, and I was like, hold it. So I think that at some level there's a lot of interest, a lot of interesting cases, a lot of interesting legal issues, and I believe that the Mass Tort Bar, the tort lawyers, do not get nearly enough credit for the public interest benefits that they have provided. Tobacco was marketed to minors for years. We stopped that. States were spending tons of money. Even the states could not get their money back treating all these people for, listen, if you want to get a good marketing plan, your marketing plan is to get minors addicted on your product. So social media, that's going on now. The Juul, that's going on. All this stuff, we know. The video games, we know. We have smoking guns left and right showing that they are intentionally marketing the minors because they know they are the weakest and easiest target, and they are a 60, 70, 80-year long client if they can get them addicted. So that's another new case, is the video games. That's going on. We've got some pretty damning documents showing their algorithms are really poisonous.
All of that makes a lot of sense. And we've seen the same thing through all of the cases over the years, where there's that common element of the company knowing in a lot of these instances that what they're doing is wrong.
So the way that we like to end these is with a little game. It feels weird following up Boy Scouts and harmful video games with a game, but we're going to. So today we came up with a little game. Your slogan is, when you've been hurt, get Gregg. Fair enough. But what about when you're hungry or when you're something else? So today, our game is a twist on fill in the blank, where we're going to call what to do when you. So I'm going to give you 5 when you've been scenarios, and I want you to tell me what you should do in that scenario. We'll go back and forth. So I'll go number 1. Number 1, when you want pizza, eat blank.
Pepe's Pizza, Connecticut. Frank Pepe.
Excellent. Yes, true.
When you're feeling tired, blank.
Suck it up.
I would take a nap. Number 3, when you're down on your luck, blank.
Just realize that others have worse luck than you, and be happy you're able to at least process that moment and realize that there's some luck involved in the equation.
When you have a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. I don't know why.
Because I wanted it him to not know what it was. Well, so much for that question. I guess still blank.
When you have a heart attack, blank.
Tell your significant other.
True.
Great answer.
And finally, number 5, when you've been hurt, blank.
Get Gregg.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today, Gregg. This was a lot of fun, and I know that we learned a whole bunch. I'm sure our audience did too.
Thank you guys for having me on.
All right. Well, that was super interesting. I learned a lot today on the mass tort side about, the process and new attorneys if they want to get involved. I think Gregg would be a good first call for them, having been in the space and using a lot of the vendors and a lot of the players. He would definitely be a first call of mine if that was something that I ever wanted to do.
Yeah, I found it interesting talking about first-party insurance dispute lawyers pivoting into new spaces and how, all this kind of plays together. It seemed like it was kind of the same thing with mesothelioma firms getting into mass torts. As that kind of started drying up, it was just about finding a new place, a new avenue to put capital. So,
yeah, I mean, it's true of growing firms too. They can either expand geographically or expand into new case types. So, yeah, totally agree. When you're successful, you're always going to be looking for the next thing.
Yep. Well, thanks again for joining us today. This was a great episode of Hot Docket Podcast. Not such a great outro, but we'll get a better one next time. Thanks for joining us. See you on the next one. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Hot Docket. We're your hosts, Bobby and Andrew, founders of MeanPub, the marketing agency for ambitious law firms.
Have questions about marketing or anything we covered today? Email us at mark@meanpug.com. Be sure to subscribe to learn more.